Greetings from Everquest Footpad. This is poison making video number 18, poison making of the future. And I just wanted to give some closing thoughts on utility and DPS poisons, as well as raid poisons. Just some closing thoughts. This by far, for the record, in my opinion, is one of the best expansions for poison making, hands down. When you just look at what the utility poisons bring to a rogue and what a rogue can start doing for groups and raids, I think that this is really a great expansion. I know that with this expansion it did unlock mercs, and mercs are a really hot button issue, but at the end of the day, I think that I'm just so excited for these poisons and what they can do, and it just adds an element of this game that we really didn't get with any expansion before. So, I hope rogues playing on earlier time lock progression servers continue through Seeds of Progression and get a chance to play this content. Really, really fun, and it makes all of the previous questing to get the Peerless Pestle, to get the Grandmaster Assassin Seal, it makes all that questing worth it. Getting to max skill early, now you get to reap the benefits. And so I just wanted to go over some of the situations in which you would use these various poisons. Okay, so when you're grouped with a slower, in other words a shaman or an enchanter, you're really not going to have any use for Myrmidon Sloth, which is your primary slow, or Warlord's Bane, which has a slow component and an attack, a debuff component. So these two utility poisons will be overwritten by an enchanter slow or a shaman slow. They'll also be overwritten by a beast lord slow, so keep that in mind, as well as a ranger slow from his epic 1.0, his or her epic 1.0. And so I tend to use Warlord's Bane when I'm soloing or I'm boxing with Annulus. I tend to use Warlords, and I use this as a pre-slow, sort of before Annulus's 1.0 will proc. And then I'll Bandolier, and for people that don't know what Bandolier is an ability that we have that allows us to rapidly switch weapons sets. And I Bandolier with Annulus from a slow sort of a weapon set to a weapon set that's primarily for DPS. So, what I'll do when I'm boxed with Annulus is I'll use Warlord's Bane or Myrmidon Sloth as a pre-slow. And then once Annulus's 1.0 goes off, I'll Bandolier him over to a more DPS heavy a more DPS heavy weapons set. And the way that works is when you click on blunt, you see how I'm going to go ahead and go out here. See how that doesn't really work. Let's just kind of rotate my camera here. There you go. So you see when I hit blunt, I have my hammer in my offhand. And when I go to slash, I immediately have a slash in my one hand. I can go to my poison making modifier, and I have the Peerless Pestle, and it's just you click one button and suddenly you can switch out your weapon sets very, very quickly. There's the OT hammer, which I've never used. Here's my Stein. I tend to use this when a mob has a damage shield on, because when you have a Stein, in other words, something that doesn't do any melee damage in your primary hand, you're not going to be affected by that damage shield. So I have a Stein Bandolier. So it allows you to quickly change your weapon sets very, very quickly. So, I get Myrmidon Sloth or Warlord's Bane procking. Then once Annulus gets his 1.0 to proc, he then Bandoliers to like a DPS type of weapon set, and then we just burn it down. So those are the conditions in which I use these slows. Otherwise, when I'm grouped with an enchanter or a shaman, I'm primarily using Monk's Bane, which reduces the mob's avoidance. Now keep in mind with armor class, we have the mitigation, which is on the left side of the armor class, and then on the right side we have avoidance. And so what incapacitate does, or cripple, this is an enchanter debuff, that reduces the mitigation here. And then what Monk's Bane does is it reduces avoidance. So I tend to be a big fan of Monk's Bane when I'm grouped with a shaman or an enchanter. When I don't have Monk's Bane on hand, I tend to use Fighter's Bane, which reduces the attack. That reduces the attack rating, or Archer's Bane, which reduces the mob's chance of critically hitting. So these are my big three: Monk's Bane, Fighter's Bane, and Archer's Bane. I tend to use these three when I'm grouped with a slower, like a shaman or an enchanter or a beast lord. All right. When I'm just grouped on my own, when I'm grouped with a non-slower, so say for example I don't have Annulus in a group, and I don't have my mercenaries, and I'm just me and four or five other people, and we don't have a slower, I tend to use Myrmidon Sloth. This is my big slow. Okay, so this is probably the best slow we have. Keep in mind, Warlords has a slow component and an attack component, so it's kind of not as good as Fighter's Bane, not as good as Myrmidon Sloth, it's somewhere in between. So that pretty much covers utility poisons. There's two other areas. The next one will probably be Messenger's Bane, which is here. Here's Messenger's Bane. This is a snare. I typically have very, very limited use for this because I don't really solo all that often. I don't fear kite. It's pretty rare that I'm in a group that doesn't have a character in it that casts snare. Keep in mind I box Annulus, and Annulus is a ranger. He uses snare. But I keep a little bit of this in my backpack just in case it's that rare event when I'm in a group that neither has a slower nor a snarer, or they have either a slower or a snarer. It's always good to have snares, and this reduces their movement rate. So that pretty much covers utilities poisons. I did not mention Quellius Trauma. And so Quellius Trauma, this is what I use in raids, because you really want to stay off the radar. You want to reduce your threat generation as much as you can on raids. And I tend to use Quellius Trauma with Consigned Bite of the Shizar. This is probably my 1-2 punch on raids. And what Consigned Bite of the Shizar does is this has a DPS component, so it'll proc a direct damage with an aggro reduction, which stacks with the aggro reduction from Quellius Trauma. Quellius Trauma reduces aggro. So these two together will keep you off the mob's radar. This will also stack with a aggro reduction from a weapon. If you have a weapon that procs an aggro reduction, they all stack. So they all work hand in hand. So that's pretty much covers utility poisons. And now I'm going to bring up some videos and cover DPS poisons. Okay, with respect to DPS poisons, I tried to illustrate this in combat, but it's kind of hard simply because of the rolling text. And I think the best way to go about figuring out which DPS poison works best is to check your logs. And what you're looking at three things. You're looking at how much the poison strikes are hitting for A, B, how often they're hitting, and C, if there's an aggro reduction component. Okay, and I've just pulled up 4 here. Now, when we look at, for example, Strike of the Shizra, okay, Strike of the Shizra, Poison Strike 8. This comes off of a Strike of the Shizra 15, rank 15. This decreases hit points for me for around 12,000 hit points. But there's no aggro reduction, and it only procs a single time, so you have to keep applying the poison over and over and over again. So this is probably going to be like the most sort of heavy-hitting DPS poison that you can buy from Lauren Thuleth. And like I said, there's no aggro reduction component like Valen or Talon's tactic poisons. Those have an aggro reduction component, and they do much more damage. But those are really raid poisons. So this is kind of like the biggest sort of kickstart to our DPS, but again, there's no aggro reduction. So this tends to make the mob turn around, and the rogue is going to have to face tank the mob. One way to work around this is to allow your tank to develop sufficient pre-threat on the mob with like slows, with snares, with stuns, whatever bellows, etc. Whatever the tank has, and then allow the tank to develop that aggro and then start attacking. The problem is that's time that you're not DPSing, so it's just one consideration with strike. So, but this is going to be our heaviest hitting poison strike. Let's transition over to Consigned Bite of the Shizar. Consigned Bite of the Shizar for me hits for around 6,000, so about half, but it also has this aggro reduction component. Okay, now I tend to, this is Poison Strike 8, this comes off of the rank 15. And when I have Bite of the Shizar that I'm applied with Quellius Trauma on raid, I tend not to take any aggro at all because I have two aggro reduction components. I have an aggro reduction component coming off of Bite of the Shizar and Quellius Trauma, but there's also it procs direct damage too. So this tends to be, I tend to favor Bite of the Shizar. When we look at Pyrelian Burn has a hate decrease on it, but by significantly less than Bite of the Shizar, okay? And it decreases hit points, so it does have a DPS effect to it, but it doesn't hit for as much, and it doesn't have as much aggro reduction. But it procs more often. Okay, the only real way that you can tell how often it procs is by looking at your logs, your EQ logs, and that can help you establish whether Bite of the Shizar will work best for you or Pyrelian Burn. There's Anger of the Shizar here. This was hitting for me. Pyrelian Burn was hitting for about 2,877. Anger of the Shizar was hitting for 2,989, but again, there's no aggro reduction component. It does proc more often than Bite of the Shizar, but there's no aggro reduction. So what I've noticed with Anger is that the deal tended to start face tanking mobs, was doing it less with Pyrelian Burn. So just know that with Anger and Pyrelian, these will hit for less than Bite of the Shizar, but they proc more often. And with Anger, there's no aggro reduction component, but there is with Pyrelian. So it's just one of these things you have to kind of feel out with DPS poisons in terms of, threat management, a DPS production, so you just kind of have to feel it out based on what your own situation is and what you're grouped with. So it's very similar to utility poisons in the respect that you got to pay attention to what your group constitution is. If you got a really, really good tank, you might be able to get away with, chain casting Strike of the Shizra and just murdering mobs, which, I tended to do quite well with a paladin because paladins are chain stunning, and even though those mobs are turning around and attacking me, they're stunned. They're not doing any damage to me. So again, pay attention to the constitution of your group. So here we can see Deal and Annulus sharing a Bloody Kithakor mission. This is Kithakor Forest as it existed several thousand years ago. Anyways, we're doing Armies of Light. We're killing Armies of Light here. Annulus is harmonied the camp and pulling in this caster. So Annulus engages a caster slowly coming in. Once he establishes aggro, then Deal will call assist on the tank mercenary, rear entry, and backdoor. Annulus's cleric mercenary will heal the group.
But you also see that the spider then proximity aggro's deal. We do see consigned bite of the Shizar going off, so the caster never aggroed onto deal, and because of that reduction in threat, kill off the spider. And so this is pretty much how I do it with a tank and healer mercenary. Well, that's pretty much it with respect to DPS and utility poison closing thoughts. Moving forward, I plan on experimenting with Quaff of the Craftsman, and because really all beyond this is just layering very, very high level poisons, very high trivials. And so in other words, poisons that have a high likelihood of failing. And so what I was planning to do is, once I collect enough ingredients to make a whole bunch of Valence and Talon's tactic poisons, I was going to use Quaff of the Craftsman and demonstrate how to use that. So that's going to be my next big poison making video. And then beyond that, it's just layering, increasing ranks of these various utility and DPS poisons as we gain levels. So as we have the next level cap increase, we're going to just layer the higher and higher ranks of these utility and DPS poisons. So that pretty much covers poison making. But I am going to try and capture videos of that Quaff of the Craftsman burn. That is kind of a big burn. So stay tuned for that, and other raid and group content, as well as educational content I plan to put out. Thanks so much.